So, good afternoon. I am Isabel Espinal. I'm a librarian here, and I'm a librarian for various subjects, including Native American and Indigenous Studies, and Latin American, Caribbean, and Latinx Studies. And today's speakers are from those identities and communities, very specifically Taíno. Today's event is about Taíno survivance, which is a word from Native American studies, which means survival, but it's like an active survival. It's looking towards the future.
Thank you.
So UMass has been, I've been here for 25 years, and I've seen a lot of changes. Just this past weekend at the intertribal social that Michelle Youngblood, who just walked in, was one of the main organizers. Joyce Vincent, who's one of the community's elders, she mentioned that back in the day, there was no land acknowledgement, and she's very happy that UMass is now acknowledging the native peoples of this area that we all live and work on. So I'm going to start with that. The University of Massachusetts Amherst acknowledges that it was founded and built on the unceded homelands of the Bakamtuk Nation, on the land of the Norwottok community. We begin with gratitude for nearby waters and lands. We recognize these lands and waters as important relations with which we are all interconnected and depend on to sustain life and well-being. The Bakamtuk had connections with these lands for millennia. Over 400 years of colonization, when Bakamtuk peoples were displaced, many joined their Algonquin relatives to the east, south, west, and north. That includes Mashpee and Aquinnah Wampanoag, Nipmuc, Narragansett, Mohegan, Pequot, Mohican communities, and Abenaki and other nations of the Wabanaki Confederacy. These native peoples still maintain connections and relationships of care for these lands today. We also acknowledge that the University of Massachusetts Amherst is a land-grant university. As part of the Morrill Land Grant Act, portions of land from 82 Native nations west of the Mississippi were sold to provide the resources to found and build this university. As an active first step toward decolonization, we encourage you to learn more about the Native nations whose homelands UMass Amherst now resides on, and the indigenous homelands on which you live and work. We also invite you to deepen your relationship with these living lands and waters. The library is trying to do programming for Native Heritage Month, which is this month, and also we have a new position in the library. We will have a Native American and Indigenous Studies librarian. So we just posted that. If you have any questions around that, you can ask me. So, and thank you for being here. We originally were going to schedule this on the 26th floor, and we got a lot of interest, and I don't know if everyone will show up, and if they don't, and it's a small group, we can reconfigure ourselves, but the 26th floor only holds so many people, and last time we did an event, those of you that were there, we kind of reached capacity and just didn't want to take the chance, so thank you for moving yourselves down here, and everyone who had to make that change. So we have some library workers who had to do a lot of extra work, Luke and Lauren in particular, so thank you to them as well for helping us put this together. All right, so I'll give you a little intro to George and Valerie. And a little bit about Taínos as well. Taínos, inhabitants of Cuba, Jamaica, Haiti, the Dominican Republic, Puerto Rico, and the Bahamas. These are the modern day names that weren't always those names and may change in the future, right? That's what we currently call those places. Taínos were the first native people to experience as well as resist European colonization, beginning in 1492 and continuing to this day. Yet many of us were taught that Taínos became extinct. Knowledge about Taíno culture survived and in some places thrived, but it was also constantly threatened by violence, the myth of extinction, and policies of physical genocide as well as paper genocide, something that George can say a little bit more about. Cacique George Baracutei Estevez is currently the leader of, please correct me, Higuayagua Taíno Luku Kairi, which organizes native families and individuals, recovers indigenous cultural practices, and participates in exchanges with Arawak and other native communities. As an independent researcher, Estevez has led and collaborated on multidisciplinary initiatives to document and interpret the legacy of native peoples across the greater Caribbean region. A veteran museum educator, he has developed innovative hands-on and didactic learning experiences for young people, families, and educators at the National Museum of the American Indian. He was a core member of the research and curatorial team that organized the 2018-2019 Smithsonian exhibition, Taíno, Native Heritage and Identity in the Caribbean. I went to that exhibit and symposium. It was packed. There was so much interest. And that was the first time I met you. Wonderful experience. You're just so approachable. And that was one of the things that prompted me to invite you here to UMass. Estevez is also a former member of the award-winning powwow group, the Arawak Mountain Singers. In addition, Estevez has recently published a Taíno dictionary, and we have copies of that here for sale if you're interested. This effort is not a revival of the classic Taíno languages, but a reconstruction using recorded and surviving Taíno words combined with cognates from related Arawak languages. In a recent article for the Smithsonian American Indian magazine, he writes, the Taíno were the first to make contact with the Spaniards, the first enslaved, and the first to rebel. We are the first mixed-blood Indians who fell victim to the Spanish pen that wrote us out of history. We have written ourselves back. Valerie Tureiyari Vargas, a Taíno activist, registered nurse, and mother, does whatever she can to help her people. She and her husband, George, have given numerous lectures and presentations throughout the country on the history and culture of the Taíno people. And I consider myself one of your people in the sense that I feel that you're both educating me about my own heritage. So I'm so grateful for the education that you do and for coming here today. So I will give it all to you now. Thank you.
Usa kasakawa batoma, dairile cacique atunwa Baracutei contatequas, lan kaiwayawasaka, lan taino karilukuno, tawariko waria ka kairi lan kisikeya, waria kain kayeke haipon, aluka sibawiku, arikoma bu yokahuama bia autanidaka, a arikawa, a abakama, a adira kena entoa, and arikoma bu Isabel Espinal, kena abatoma at UMass, and what I said is, there, as it is. Good evening, everyone. My name is, there it is. So, yes, my name is George, Baracutei con Catequas, and I have been on this journey with about my heritage, trying to dispel the myth of extinction my entire life. I actually been identifying as Taíno since I was 5 years old. That's a long, long story that I'm not going to get into today. What I do want to talk to you a little bit about is the history of the Taíno people and how we became extinct and what we've done to write ourselves back into history. So let us begin. So, So this is the logo of the Iwayagua people. Iwayagua started out as a small research group. I'm very heavy into doing research, and it's just ballooned and ballooned until it became obvious that, first of all, that we had made a lot of connections, family connections, and it blossomed into a tribal community, which now has over 2,400 people, and it's constantly growing still. This symbol that's over here represents basically who we are. This is it comes from a petroglyph. Her name is Wabansesh, and she is a female entity which causes destruction and also renewal, and that's what our movement is all about. This H, of course, is for Iwayagua, which is the name of the group, and the sun represents Puerto Rico and everything west of Puerto Rico. So yeah, the Taíno people, by the way, are the people that discovered Columbus. You might have the story wrong, it's okay, I understand. But the fact is that we were home and Columbus was lost. So I just like to remind everybody that the Taíno people were the ones who discovered Columbus. So this is the Caribbean Sea, the Caribbean islands. When I first put up this slide, it was because sometimes I would do presentations at schools, high schools, and I was amazed that some Caribbean kids didn't even know where the Caribbean islands were. So the Taíno people at the time of contact lived all in the Bahamas, Cuba, Jamaica, Dominican Republic, and Haiti, and Puerto Rico, and some other Arawakan people on some of the smaller islands as well. So up until 2 years ago, very little was known about the actual migration routes of the Arawak people. So what we know today is that about 6,000 years ago, people that they call the Archaics began migrating from South America into the Caribbean. Some migrations, believe it or not, were by canoe straight to the bigger islands, traversing all that water, and some came by island hopping. So this first migration was about 6,000 years ago, and then the migration stopped for a while, and then about 2,500 years ago, another Arawakan migration began from South America, and these are called the Saladoids, and they began island hopping. So by the time that Columbus and his men encountered my ancestors, more or less one culture existed throughout the Caribbean. At least that's the impression that the Spanish had. Today we know that there was actually a lot of different little cultures, local cultures. We weren't one unified people. We're more unified today as Taíno than we were back in those days. But that is the story of the Caribbean, how it was populated by these Arawakan speakers that came from South America. And then on October 12, 1492, Columbus set sail from Asia on a trade mission. Set sail to Asia on a trade mission, supposedly, with these three little ships, the Niña, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria. And Columbus said we were going to sail west to get to the east. And what had happened was that when I was a kid, they used to teach us that Columbus was trying to prove that the world was round, and he was the only one who believed that the world was round. But that's not true. We knew that the world was round since the time of the Greeks. However, with the fall of Constantinople, passage to the east became almost impossible. So he was looking for a way east by sailing west. And sure it was, on October 12, 1492, he landed in the Caribbean. Now, for someone who came to the Caribbean on a trade mission, the first thing that he did when he landed in the Caribbean was plant the flag and claimed everything and everyone that he saw as property of Spain. This is not how you trade, this is how you invade. So Columbus goes on to describe my ancestors. He says they willingly traded everything that they owned. They were well built, as you can see. They have good bodies and handsome features. They wear their hair long in the back and short in the front. Their hair is black and coarse like that of a horse's mane. And of course, he also talks about all the trade items. So my ancestors gave them parrots and balls of cotton, native cotton, spears, and many other things that they exchanged. The Spanish gave us glass beads, which were unknown in the New World, and also these hawk bells. And this becomes very important later on in our story. Now, what caught Columbus's attention more than anything else was karacuri. The karacuri is a gold ring that most Taíno people wore on their noses. And it's made from smelted gold. And this is exactly what Columbus was actually looking for. They came not to trade for spices, they were looking for riches to enrich the monarchy of Spain. On October 17, 1492, Columbus uses the word Indio for the very first time. On the very next day, all the native people of the Western Hemisphere became known as Indians. The history books tell us that the reason why they called us Indians is because Columbus believed that he was on his way to India. However, consider this, India was not called India in 1492. It was called Hindustan. And now Columbus was inspired, according to him, he was inspired to become a world traveler, an explorer, by reading Marco Polo. But in Marco Polo's time, India was called Pandaya. So we have our own theory as to how this word Indio came to be. So Columbus, although being Italian, he never wrote in Italian. He only wrote in Spanish. But occasionally he wrote in Latin. And he was a devout Catholic. So everywhere that he went, he was always marveling at the bodies of the people, because everybody was very well fit, very healthy, and he would use the term corpus indios. Now the word corpus indios gives you the word indio as well. So that's where I believe it comes from. I can't say that theory holds 100% concrete water, but that's what we believe that the word comes from. On Christmas Day, the Santa Maria crashes off the coast of Haiti, and my ancestors helped them salvage every single thing. They said that not even a nail was missing. And Columbus, with the remains of the Santa Maria, created a fort called La Isabela and left 39 men behind. And he set sail to Spain with the Niña and the Pinta. It wasn't that these 39 men couldn't fit on the boat. The thing is that on the very first trip, they brought back slaves to Spain. So that's just to tell you that slavery actually began from the very first moment that they landed in the Caribbean. These are original Spanish woodcuts of the time, and it is a depiction of all the atrocities that were being committed. What happened is that there was not as much gold in the Caribbean as Columbus promised the king and queen. And what happens is that they had to exact this at any cost. Over here you see these mass graves. When people rebelled, the most peaceful of people, they were killed, and then they would be hacked into pieces to feed their Spanish mastiffs. And this is in the words of the Spanish themselves. All you have to do is read the chronicles, and you'll see that all these things actually happen. And forgive me if I give it to you in the raw, but this is the real story, not the one that they've painted to look like Columbus was some kind of hero or something like that. So when Columbus sets out to Spain, he returns the very next year, and when he returns with this affidavit, with this public decree called a papal bull that says, any land not inhabited by Christians was available to be discovered, claimed, and exploited by Christian rulers, and declared that the Catholic faith and the Christian religion be exalted everywhere, increased and spread, that the health of souls be cared for, and of that barbarous nations be overthrown and brought to the faith. And this is King Ferdinand's letter that was read to all the native people whenever they came in contact with new groups. And sometimes they call this King Ferdinand's letter to the Taíno, where it basically tells us that if we fail to comply, that all this harm would come to us, and that we would be guilty of these offenses for forcing them to do this work, because we were not obedient vassals. In Columbus's contemporaries' own words, Indians were being killed sometimes in 12s or 13 in the name of the king and queen. In the name of the apostles and Jesus Christ the Redeemer. And one of the eyewitnesses of this time period is called Bartolomé de las Casas. Bartolomé de las Casas said, with my own eyes I saw the Spaniards cut up the nose and ears of Indians without provocation, simply because it pleased them to do it. Now he originally had come to the Dominican Republic as a encomendero. He came to own Indians and own land. But he saw throughout the time all the murders that were being committed, all the atrocities, and he became a priest. So the encomienda system was basically that a Spaniard was given a big tract of land and 50 or 100 Indians to work to death, and they just had to pay them with Christianity. This, of course, caused the people to rebel. The Spanish didn't call it slavery, they called it encomienda. And the slave owner was called encomendero. But as bad luck for the Taíno people, what came in the form of these diseases that were not present in the New World, smallpox, measles, and chickenpox did not exist here. And this caused a lot of the population to decrease. In a lot of areas when the Taíno people, when the Spanish arrived, up to 80% of the people had already disappeared due to these diseases preceding their arrival. So back to the gold and the hog belt. When Columbus saw that the gold was nowhere to be found, only gold dust in the rivers, he exacted a tax on all the male children, and I know the males, from the years of 14 years and above. They had to fill a hog belt full of gold dust every 3 months. That was their quota. So if you missed your first quota, they would cut off a finger. If you missed the second one, it was your hand that got cut off. If you missed your third one, it was your foot. And if you missed your fourth one, it was your life that you would lose. And of course, this caused the people to rebel because this was barbarous. Now, up to these days, and my wife will tell you about this in a little bit, one of our crops, which is the yuca that you see here, gives us this bread that we call casabe. And that was the only food that the Spanish actually got used to. And the Spanish actually at this time period were actually starving to death too, because they were not finding their foods. They couldn't adjust to the foods that you had in the Caribbean. So our ancestors started paying them tribute in the form of casabe bread. So in a sense, we were feeding them so they can subjugate us. And this bread became known as el pan de la conquista, the conquest bread. And this is just another depiction of Taíno people getting their noses and ears and legs and arms cut off. And sometimes they did this just so they can feed their dogs, the Spanish dogs. So Columbus says they have no iron, their spears are made of cane, they would make fine servants. With 50 men, we can subjugate them all. What's interesting about this comment is that he said this right after he said that the Taíno people were the most friendliest people on the planet and that no one is more giving than they are. And this is what was actually in his mind, of course. So this is a warfare Spanish style. When the Spanish arrived, they had crossbows, muskets, swords. They wore metal on their body, and they had horses, and even the horses had metal as well. In contrast, my people use manaya, which are stone axes, somara and bairano, which are bows and arrows, and bairaba, which are spears, and macana, which are sword-like, they look like paddles, but they're actually supposed to be like swords made of wood. So you can see that it was not a fair fight. And also that the Spanish had a very different way of fighting. So our people, when they would get into wars, they fought until the other side submitted, the other side gave up, and then they would just walk away. But the Spanish fought until they killed everybody in sight. But we learned to adjust to their war tactics in time. And this is a very famous war that happened. It's called La Guerra de Enriquillo. And it was fought in this place called Bauruco, the Bauruco Mountains. It lasted 15 years. And after this war, which we won, the very first treaty that was signed by a native nation and a European power was in the Dominican Republic. And this is the actual treaty that was signed. So we are victims of what I call paper genocide. And the reason I say that is because with a musket, with a sword, with a cannon, they can kill you once. But with the pen, they can keep killing you over and over again. once something gets written down, it becomes a fact. So that future generations, when they read this, they believe all these facts. And this was happening in the Caribbean. Doesn't matter that occasionally you find reference to Indians, but you find everywhere more reference to this extinction, and this is how the Taíno people became extinct. By 1565, the Spaniards claimed that there were no more Taínos anywhere in the Caribbean. And that was the biggest myth ever created. So reasons for extinctions is the census records. The Spanish could only count the people that lived in the periphery of where they were at. Now the Caribbean is full of mountains, especially the Dominican Republic and Puerto Rico. It's impossible for you to traverse those mountains. The Spanish were not looking, when they were taking their census takers, were not looking for people living in the mountains where the people were hiding. So this is one of the reasons why the Taíno people were actually able to survive. And also racial mixture. Every 40% of all the recognized Spanish wives were actually Taíno in the Caribbean. For every 3 Africans that made that trip from Africa to the Caribbean, only 1 African female survived. So that means that a lot of African men needed Indian wives, to get Indian wives, especially to survive in the mountains that they were unfamiliar with. So a lot of intermarriage happened between Indians and Spanish and Africans. And also Christianization. So in 1478, Spain officially began the Spanish Inquisition. And that was that little campaign, which was to eradicate all the Jews from their own countrymen, from their country. And in order for a Jewish person to escape the barbarity, the torture and killing that they were receiving at the hand of the Spanish, all they had to do was Christianize. Every time that a Jew became a Christian, he was no longer considered Jewish, and that he was now called a converso or convert, or the derogatory term for them would be marrano. And this is how, by 1492, Spain claimed that they had eradicated their Jewish problem. This practice came with the Spaniards to the Americas. Every time a native person became a Christian, he was no longer considered an Indian any longer. So I'm going to tell you a little bit now about my job at the Museum of the American Indian. I came to work at the museum about 1994 at the Smithsonian. I have a deep connection to the museum since I was 11 years old, but I'm not going to get into that now. I worked in all 3 of these facilities, but I was actually stationed here. This is the museum in New York, where I spend most of my time. This is our museum in DC, Washington, DC, and this is the Cultural Resource Center, where we house the collection in Suitland, Maryland. And after spending all that time in the museum, we worked finally on this exhibit that was the first of its kind, dealing with Taíno survivance. All right, that's a new word that you just showed me. Because see, every exhibit before this one, it was always archaeological. It always showed all the Taíno objects, and it always ended with the Taíno became extinct by this date, by this date. But this one didn't deal with extinction. This one told all the different stories, but it also talked to the modern people, to the modern Taíno, and how and they got our story. And they also showed that it's like everything that you see here, these are all authentic Taíno, but none of them are archaeological. This was made by Taíno people now. Because believe it or not, a lot of the things that Columbus witnessed when he first came to the islands are still being done to this day in the countryside, in the rural areas. So that's me with my beautiful wife in that picture at the opening day of the exhibit. So this was probably the best time of all my 25 years at the museum, because it was Taíno, of course. And the museum, we dealt with all the tribes from North and South America. There's a lot of people to cover. So when they finally got to Taíno, I was very relieved. I was able to, while we were doing the research for this exhibit, I was able to travel to different Caribbean islands, to different communities, looking for markers of indigeneity. And this is what I was looking for. I was looking for identity, oral tradition, material culture, customs, agricultural practices, language, spirituality, and genetics. So I am going to fast forward because I don't want to take all the time. All right, I don't want to do that again, but I am going to go to just to show you just a few things. So a little bit of oral tradition. This is my grandmother who died at 104 years old. And my grandmother always identified as Indio. And she had a lot of family stories of all our indigenous relatives. This is Doña Dorita. And what she has in her hands is our two stones. We have a lot of spiritual practices in the Caribbean, particularly the Dominican Republic, that revolve around water and stones. And this is similar to what they do in South America. This is our modern day semiism. What I call a semi is those objects that you see there. Those are called semi. They're made of stone or wood or bone. But she says that she received these stones in a dream, and these Indians came to her and gave her a mission. But when she woke up, she forgot what the mission was, but she found the stones under her pillow. But this is a very common story throughout the Dominican Republic. And then this is Eddie Garcia. He's in a cave touching Taíno petroglyphs. The people who live in these areas believe that if you touch the petroglyphs and you're sick, that the ancestors will heal you. And that's part of our oral tradition that you see here. And this is my mom. She just turned 100 on Friday. Thank you very much. And growing up, we had a boogeyman story, and that was Siwapa. The Siwapa is a being that has really long hair all the way down to its ankle, but its feet are inverted. And my mother says that at nighttime she can hear the Siwapas making all these sounds, and then you would hear them breaking into the bohío. The bohíos are our houses, and they would always steal corn and salt. And what happens is that in the morning when you would wake up and you would follow the footprints, you would go in the wrong direction because the feet are inverted. So at a certain point in the Caribbean, they started telling us, that's an African story. It has nothing to do with Indians. Even though the name itself, Siwapa, is an indigenous name. So I started researching this, and I found that all the Indians in the Circum-Caribbean region have this exact same being living in their folk tales. She's called Siguanama in El Salvador. She's called Curupia in Venezuela, Caipora in Brazil. She's called Bush Dai Dai in Guyana, and etc. So let me move on to genetic practices and genetics, and then my wife can take over from there. Okay, so what happened was, right? All this time when the Taíno people are getting back together, all the historians kept claiming, but there are no Taínos. If you read at the history books, every single Indian died. I mean, it's very clear, right? So in the late 1990s, they started doing mitochondrial DNA studies in the Caribbean. So mitochondrial DNA, for those that don't know, mitochondria is the battery that runs a cell. It's passed from mother to children. Only females can pass it along. It is found in the eukaryotic cell battery. And it says that mtDNA doesn't recombine. That means it stays the same. And American Indian, and it's separated by haplogroups. And American Indian haplogroups are A, B, C, and D, and sometimes X. So when they did this in Puerto Rico for the first time, 61% of all Puerto Ricans have Native American mitochondrial DNA. Now that's pretty good for an extinct people, when you think about it, right? So how did that happen? And then when they did more studies, they found that 22% in the Dominican Republic, 33% in Cuba, and they haven't really done much more in the other islands as far as mitochondria that I know of yet. But that's a big number when you consider that today Cuba has almost 15 million people. The Dominican Republic has about 12 million people, and there's about 5 million people in Puerto Rico. So that's a lot of people with mitochondrial DNA, indigenous mitochondrial DNA. But then there's Y chromosome. Y chromosome is also separated into haplogroups. Native haplogroups are QM3, QM242, and C3. It also doesn't recombine. And it's only passed down from the father to his male child. Okay, so in the last one that they did, they found that the Native American paternal line in the Dominican Republic goes up as high as 10%. That's also pretty good. So you find actually people that have both mitochondria and the Y chromosome, that's indigenous. But it gets even better than that. So autosomal DNA is the DNA that's passed down from your mother and your father. It does recombine because you get 50% from your mother and 50% from your father, right? Now, when people take DNA tests today and they'll say, wow, I got like 10% Native American autosomal DNA, and sometimes they'll feel that that's low, but when you think about it, it's actually very high. Because in 7 generations, right, you have 128 ancestors. If you only had one that was a full-blooded Indian, you would only score 0.78% Native American. The highest that I've seen in the Caribbean is like 40%, but that doesn't mean that there's not higher, but it runs everything from 5% to up to 40%. And so far, every Puerto Rican, every Dominican, every Cuban has ever taken this test will have some autosomal DNA score. So DNA has nothing to do with being Indian as far as culture is concerned. I just want to make that clear. You know, we didn't ask for this though. This was something that they asked for because they believed that it wasn't going to be there, and then to their surprise, it was there. You know, but what happened is that when the DNA became the law of the land, a lot of the historians, they countered this new narrative. They said, no, you know what it is that after all the Taínos died, they brought in Africans to supplement the Taíno, and they also brought Indians from North and South America. So this is where you're getting all this DNA from. So it wasn't until about 4 or 5 years ago that in an island called Eleutheria, they found, in the Bahamas, they found 4 skulls, 4 Native American skulls. They were 1,000 years old, and one of them had a tooth with a full strand of DNA. So this was our aha moment, because now that we're going to compare that DNA with modern day people. If we didn't match that tooth, that meant that maybe the historians are right. Maybe we're just native, but just from other places, and we just don't know our story. So they took 177 Puerto Ricans, and they matched it against this tooth that they found in the Bahamas. And mind you that the people in the Bahamas originally had migrated from the Dominican Republic and Cuba. So it was really it was remote that they were going to match Puerto Ricans. But sure enough, all 177 of these Puerto Ricans matched that tooth. And that's when finally the extinction narrative started crumbling. And now it's very rare that you find, especially geneticists will never talk about Taíno extinctions. They'll talk about assimilation, but not extinction. And that's why, but like for people like myself and my wife, and many Puerto Ricans and other islanders, we always knew that this was the fact. We weren't relying on DNA, but it's there. So yeah, and this is just other studies that were done before about looking for native ancestry. This is the famous shovel-shaped incisors that only Native people and Asian people have. That's the 4 frontal teeth have this scoop-like in it, and it's up to like I think it's like 56% in Puerto Rico and like 45% in the Dominican Republic, something to that effect. Anyway, but this is just like all this anthropological stuff that really doesn't amount to much, but like I said, we didn't look for this, but it's there. And this is just to show you, these are Native people in Cuba, from Baracutei, Cuba. And this is our Native people from Puerto Rico. And these are natives from the Dominican Republic. And this is my group, Iwayagua, doing what we do based on research and also based on rescuing a lot of traditions that are still being practiced in many of the rural areas of the Caribbean. And to finish up, this is my wife, and this is a Wapishana Arawak woman. We were invited to dance with them. They came to dance in the United States, and they had heard about the Taíno people, and they wanted to dance with us. And we were able to dance with them, and it was really good. was amazing about it was that their dances are very similar to ours, so anyway, that's it. So with that, I'm going to close so that don't hog up my wife's time.
Hello, everybody. Good evening. My name is Valerie Tureiyari. I am Taíno from the island of Puerto Rico. I came to understand and be more involved with my Taíno identity back in the 1990s. I realized that the stories that my mother was telling me were actually those stories of my ancestors, of my Taíno ancestors. We used to call them old wives' tales, right? So the women would say, if it's your moon time, you cannot touch meat, you can't touch a plant. All these things that I learned from my mother, I didn't realize were indigenous until I was older. So what happened was I started having children. We have 9 now altogether. When I had children, I realized I wanted them to understand what my culture, what my identity was, and how I passed that down to them. I was seeing a lot of our youth, our Caribbean youth, getting into trouble, not finishing school, having problems. And I believe in my heart that was because they had a lack of identity. They only identified with the street and what was the material things in front of them. They weren't given the information that I and my husband have, and a lot of other people do as well. So that was my biggest impetus to get involved so that I could teach the youth, so I can make them proud of who they are and have them involved in our community and with other communities as well. This is one of the things that George and I do a lot, is that we do work with a lot of other communities. We have friends in the Narragansett, Nipmunk, Wampanoag, Abenaki, all those folks. We work with them. We have powwows with them. We talk about each other's cultures, and we support each other. And I think that's a really good thing for youth to have that support of our elders. I am the tribal grandmother. So they call me for different things, and yes, I am that old. They call me for different things. We have women's groups. We get together either on the internet or we're in person. We do have a lot of people in the New England, New York, and New Jersey area, so we were able, especially before COVID, unfortunately COVID caused a lot of damage in terms of being able to connect with people. But we had a place out in Manhattan that was actually owned by Heather Henson, Jim Henson's daughter, the puppeteer. She had something called the Puppet House, I forget what it is. So we would meet there, and we would do workshops on how to make maracas, how to weave we have some fiber coyers, we call them, armbands, how to dance. We develop songs, so we go and record. We have musicians, and we have doctors, we have professors from Yale in our group. So this is all about discovering our identity and claiming our identity and our pride in who we are. So some of the things that I wanted to talk to you about was our food, this cassave bread. One of the things that George had mentioned is it saved the Europeans from starving. We helped them not starve, unfortunately. But anyway. So why? Why was this bread so important? Well, when the Europeans came, they brought European food to plant, and we're talking about a very different climate. So their food was not working. Just like in the Americas, when they came through on the Mayflower and they couldn't find food, they couldn't grow food. It was the Indians who saved them. Why is this? This does not spoil. This bread does not spoil. It could last on top of your refrigerator, which is where ours is. It could last a couple of years up there. You know, if the mice don't get to it. Why? Because it has some cyanide in it. We'll talk about. It's made out of this yucca. Everybody's seen these in Stop and Shop or Big Y. This is a little tiny one. Sometimes they pull these gigantic yuccas that are all the way from the floor up here, and you'll see a man holding a big yucca stalk like that. So what did they do with this? This is a yucca. It's 26 different varieties. Many of them are poisonous. How did my ancestors figure out how to make a bread from a poisonous root vegetable is beyond me. It had to be, divine providence or something. So they would peel it, take the skin off, and then you have this white vegetable, basically, root vegetable inside. They would take that, and then they would grate it down with what we call the guayo, or a guayo. This is made of metal. We did not have metal prior to contact in the Caribbean, so we used coral, seashells, different things. So what our ancestors would do, and our present day people would take that white yucca and just scrape it down into this pulp. Once they had this pulp, they would have to squeeze out that liquid, because that liquid is actually the cyanic acid, and that's what's going to kill you. So they would squeeze it out using something called a sibukan. And this is made out of plant fibers, as you can see, well woven, just like they would weave baskets and different things. So they would take that pulp, and these are much bigger. They actually hang from the top of the boiler and go all the way down. You can open it up and then put all the pulp inside and then hang it. And they would put a stick here and start to pulp and leach out all the liquid into something called a bate. This is a common wooden tray that is used by our native ancestors and still today. So they would squeeze it all out into this bate, and then they would take this poison. What do you do with this poison? My ancestors were very resourceful. Nothing gets wasted. They take this poison down to the river and throw it. Once they would throw it in, as a fish would swim by, they would get stunned by the cyanide and float to the top. They would then throw a nasa, or a net, over the river and pull in all those fish. How do you eat those fish if they have cyanide inside of them? Well, if they're cooked at a certain temperature on a barbecue, it eliminates the cyanide. And so that's how they would go fishing. Now we have this drying kind of pulp, right? It's no longer, so we leave it out to dry, and then we take it, and we use something called, it's like a sifter, right? It's called a hibe. And we would put the grains in here, and we would rub them down and throw away all the big chunks, because the big chunks probably had more cyanide than we want. Once we take this, now we have all this dry, it's kind of grainy, it's not very powdery, it's a little bit textured. So you take that and put it on a bure. And it's hard to see, but if you want to pass this around, this is a traditional stove that is made of clay. It has a clay bottom with a flat round top and an opening. In that opening, you would shove firewood, and that would heat up the clay. You would take that, and then you would spread the casabe, and you would spread it with a turtle shell. Why a turtle shell? Turtle is considered sacred. She is one of our mothers. So to do this onto a piece of bread is to make that bread sacred as well. So once that's all, you didn't bring any casabe.
No, I forgot.
Once they usually come in very big discs. They'll make these big discs, and then they'll put them out to cool off and dry, and the commercial people actually cut them into pizza slices. I don't know if you've seen the casabe in a pizza slice kind of container or in a round container. So that's how we make casabe, and that's how my ancestors survived and how the Europeans survived because of us. Some of the other things we're going to talk about are, well, let me talk about my regalia. My husband is a headdress maker. He's the one who made this headdress. He's made over 1,000 so far. That's his chief headdress. What is it made out of? Well, things that are found in the Caribbean and things that are found in South America, because that's where we originally came from. So we use macaw feathers as you can see, because those are what they use out in South America now, and these are turkey. So we use turkey feathers as well. Okay. So this bandolier was actually made, I don't know if anybody saw this movie called Smoke Signals, but there was a group, the singing group that was with it was called Ulali, and one of the singers is half Taíno, half Tuscarora, and she gifted us, I have one and so does Jorge, she gifted us these bandoliers, which I love. Taíno people, huh?
Purafe.
Purafe. Her name's Purafe. Let's see. The headdress, the bandolier. Oh, we love to wear jewelry. Taínos love to dance, they love music, they love to make noise. So we always have ankle shakers when we're out dancing in a powwow setting. And we also wear armbands. And my ancestors didn't wear any clothes, right? So we would be in jail if we tried to do that, so that's why we make the nagua. We would wear coiros. The women would wear coiros, which are armbands, leg bands, and jewelry. If you didn't have those things, then you were considered naked, even though you had no other clothes on. So we developed nawas. Nawas were actually were worn by women who were married and had children. And it was just a small little cloth to cover the front area. So we actually have nawas, and depending on your status and your age, that's how long your nawa is. The men's nawas are always above the knee, young women always above the knee, elders are much longer. So that's why. What are the symbols that we have? You're probably thinking, why do I have a Greek key on this nawa that's Caribbean? It's not a Greek key. It's called the meander. And you find it in cultures not only in Europe, you find them in South America. In the indigenous cultures, you will see them wearing their regalia with this on. And the reason why this is important as well is because it shows us a path, the path that we have to walk. This is our Iguayagua symbol, as he explained before. This is Guabancesh. She is the goddess of destruction and rebirth. So this is what we're all about. We were almost destroyed, almost. They tried very hard, but we survived. And that's why Guabancesh is so important to us. The sun is because we come from the east, and everything in Puerto Rico, west, is considered Taíno. So we start with that, and the H is for the Guayagua tribe. This is this double spiral within a spiral is called it's the Milky Way. It's a representation of the Milky Way. This is a hummingbird. Why is this important? Because when we leave our bodies, we enter a canoe. And in that canoe, we go traveling through the Milky Way, being led by the hummingbird to where the ancestors reside. So that's why these things are very important. These bear claws are personal. Everyone has personal stuff within their nawa. These bear claws there are no bears in the Caribbean, and I won't even pretend, but there were. And this came to me in a dream, and that's why they're on my nawa. So that's what that's for. Some of the instruments that we use, maraca. Does anybody know where that name comes from? Maraca?
Anybody want to guess?
Anybody want to guess? Every time I ask this, people go, Spain, Spanish. No, it's Taíno. You would not believe the amount of words, and you should go through that too, the amount of words that you will find in our language, English and Spanish, that are originally Taíno. So you talk about maraca, you talk about canoa, which is a canoe. I talk about tabaco, that's also a Taíno word. Manatee, barbecue, buccaneer, and all the place names, and so many words that are then. And because of that, we were able to reconstruct our language, our Hiwatahia language. This is a wamo. And this was used by people in the rural areas. They'd go up on their mountaintop, they'd be on their little mountain community, And they would call other communities to let you know, hey, we're having a party, or our yuca is ready. Do you want some? They kind of know by the sound where it's coming from and who's calling them. I'm going to try this one. This is a big one.
That's good.
Not bad. So that's what that was used for. We're very resourceful, so we used a lot of our plants to make things. This is called a macuto. People would go from one village to another and they'd be carrying things. They would use something like this, like a macuto. This is a big one called a aikana, and this actually goes on the sides of the donkeys, right? So they started making this post-contact because we didn't have donkeys prior.
You should use them on the back.
Or use them on the back to carry their vegetables and stuff. These are called cutaras. These are actual sandals that they would make from fiber. And you know, you're walking through the jungle, you're going to need something to keep your feet from falling apart. And so these are some of the things that our ancestors did. We used a lot of gourds as well. We use gourds for dishes, for cups. Here's a gourd cup that's all design. It has all designs on it. That was I forget what you call that. It was like punched in. It was like done with little puncher. My mom used to say, "Oh yes, we all drank out of this. We all had," and it's called a dita. And we all had our little bowls and stuff. But grandma, my grandma, her mom, she had a tin can. No one could touch that tin can because that was special. One of our most important instruments here is, besides the maraca, because with the maraca, one of the things that you do, the reason we made these maracas was somebody, you know, who had the dream? Somebody, the little white stones.
Oh, that was Arawanil.
Can you say that?
Wait, yeah. So I'm going to tell you the story of how we got the maraca. So so this is a story that we borrowed from our South American relatives, simply because the main character is also found in the Caribbean. So the story goes that a long time ago in the Amazon region, there had been a big flood. And nothing was growing, and everybody was really sick and dying. And there was a medicine man whose name was Arawanili, who we called Wayahona. And he was very despondent because as much as he tried to heal his people, nothing was working. So he goes off to the ocean, by the ocean, and he's there lamenting this situation. And all of a sudden, he sees something in the water. And it's a water spirit, and it's a female. Most of our water spirits are female. And she rises out of the water and she tells him, "Listen, it's not your fault that you can't heal the people. The thing is that your prayers are not reaching Creator." So she says, she pulls out from under the water, she pulls out a reed. She goes, "I want you to take this reed and take it someplace where you can grow and grow it. And once it grows, cut it down and bring me everything, the bark, the whole plant, and the fruit." So he goes off and he does that. When the tree grows, he plants it. When the tree grows and the tree gives him the huera, which is our gourds. Our gourds grow on trees. They don't grow under the ground like American gourds. And so he cuts down the tree and he goes back to the ocean, and the spirit comes back out and says to him, "Okay, now before we get started, I want you to climb that mountain, and when you get up there, you're going to find these little white stones called kaletukuya, and I want you to collect these. These little white stones are ancestors, and you need these for what I'm going to ask you to make." So he goes off on that mission. He comes back with a bunch of kaletukuya, the little white stones, and then she tells him, "Okay, now you're going to take the gourd and you're going to cut it down. You're going to drill a hole in it, and you're going to take everything out from the inside. And then from one of the branches, you're going to make this arm that you're going to put on it. And then you're going to put those white stones inside. And that's how the maraca is made. So he says, when you shake the maraca, all those white stones, those are actually ancestors, okay? And then when you say your prayers and you shoot them up to the sky, they will carry them up to the sky, and then you'll be able to connect with the ancestor better, because with the creator better, because it says the creator throws down bad things and good things, but he doesn't do it on purpose. It's just that's his energy that comes down, and sometimes we catch it. So when he goes back, he shows all the other vejiques, or piamanes, the way they call them down there. Vejique for us is a medicine man. And he shows them how to make the maraca. And that's how the maraca came to the Arawak people. So all Arawak people have this in ceremony. But of every traditional one always has stones in the inside.
Okay. Some of the other gourds that we use, this is called a maima to carry water. And this is our last instrument here, is called a mayowakan. This is a little one. We have really large ones, medium ones, but these are used for our areito. And areito is our powwow, if you will. It's our dance festival. A lot of times it involved dancing. It also involved a ball game called batu, which was very similar to that what the Mayans were doing in South America. Little rubber ball, using only your feet, hands, knees, and things like that. And it would be done, a lot of these games would be to resolve issues between tribes as well. They would have tribes come together to this areito, and then they would have the ball game, have fun, and things would be resolved during those. So this is a log drum. It's made out of a log, obviously. It is burned on the inside and scraped until they reach a certain length, and then they put an H cut on top. The reason the H cut is on top is because it has a different tone. So okay. And so if you ever see us at a powwow in New England, you'll see that a lot of times we'll bring a drum, they'll have us dance, and the people will be up there dancing with us.
So with that,
You want to talk about those?
I'm going to say thank you. What?
You want to talk about those?
Does anybody want to hear about this? Oh, you do? Okay. I think I can do that. So these are called semi. And I'm going to tell you why these are so important to us. So semi are the way we represent certain spirits. We don't call them deities really because they're not gods. These are just spirits, because our people are animists, like most native people. Everything is alive. Everything has some kind of consciousness in it. So that's why everything is medicine. You know, some good medicine, some bad medicine. But this is the way we represent them. When you look at Taíno, what they call art, you know, for native people, it's not art. This is just what we do. But our Taíno semis represent different things. So over here, for example, most Taíno semis are made in what's called the Janus mode. So over here, you see a face, right? You can see that face, right? Right? Now, if I turn it around, you see another face, right? And you can guess what that is. That's an owl. So this semi is probably speaking about something that has to do with death, because for us, owls represent death. And if I go like this, here, you'll see yet another figure in there. So some semis could have up to 7 different figures. Each one of these has a different meaning. And then you have, of course, all these geometric patterns. Like if I showed you this pattern here, I don't know if you can guess what it is, but that's actually yaboa, which are herons. And then this one here is very important to us. We call these thunderstones. And the thunderstones are believed to come, that after when there's lightning and thunder, that they fall from the sky. And all people in the countryside, they'll go, and they do this from Guyana all the way up to Cuba. After it thunders, they'll go out and looking for these thunderstorms. They believe that once they fall from the sky, they'll go down 9 feet deep. Now, once you get these, what they do is that they put them in gourds full of water, and they're supposed to collect bad energy that then you throw out, and to get rid of whatever bad is in the house. But it actually, what it does is that it keeps the water very cold, because this stone is always cold for some reason. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So that is what we call a thunderstone. And if you're from the Caribbean, you must have seen this in an altar at some point in your life. Nobody who's from the Caribbean lives without one of these, right? These are pilones, right? Every Puerto Rican here knows what a pilon is. So this is something that comes from our ancestors too. However, African people had pilones as well. So this is one of those things where it's like cultural reinforcement. The Africans had them, we had them, so they continue to this day.
The ones we had were really big though.
Yeah, ours were actually a lot bigger in the old days. So, yeah. And so a little bit about weapons that I was showing you before. That macana this is the way how big they really are. Now, the way these worked was that my ancestors believed in getting really close and personal with their enemies. So what they would do is that they would hide in the forest, and then when their enemies would come out and just hit them in the head. And I know that sounds gruesome, but when you think about how many good baseball players we have coming out of the Dominican Republic and Puerto Rican, that you understand where it came from. So this is the macana. And then the other one is the manaya. The manaya, this one, it has a simple design, right? It has the thunderstone in the middle, and it's just put between a split piece of wood and tied up. I was real traditional with this one. I used crazy glue. You know? But that's not the way it was done back in the day. In the old days, a father would take his young son into the forest, and they would find a nice live young tree, and then they would take the stone, and then first they would burn a hole in the tree and put the stone inside of it, and then you let the tree heal itself and grows. Once that happens, this becomes embedded in the tree forever. You know, you've seen that happen before, right? And then when the young man is ready to become an adult, they go back to the forest and cut it down, and then you shape an axe around that stone. One that will give you a weapon very formidable, and it'll never come out of there. See, my ancestors were ingenious people. Like all native people, we knew how to live in the world that surrounded us in a good way, without harming things around you and using everything. If you kill an animal, you're going to use the whole thing, and when you cut down a tree, it's the same thing. So that's the way we still maneuver ourselves.
There's another type of manaya. This is actually pre-Columbian. Belongs to my husband. So if you notice, it's a ceremonial one because it has a semitic face on it.
Yeah. So this one was given to me by my brother, my older brother. And when it came to me, it came in a big slab of dirt, and it was found behind my uncle's house, who had passed away, and they were digging in his and they found these. So we lived in that area forever, and I like to think that somehow that perhaps this belonged to an ancestor, direct ancestor. You know, you never know. But anyway, I've had it with me for about 40 years now. So, does anybody have any questions? Yes.
I was like about your tattoos. Isn't there a hair? Do those have any special significance to you?
Well, this symbol is tied to eternity and the heron, and this is a symbol that has called me all my life. Every time I saw it, I've seen it on pottery in the Dominican Republic. But in Puerto Rico, this particular symbol is where it's really been developed, and so this one I got from Puerto Rico. It's just something that I've always liked, and one day I said, you know what, I'm gonna do it now, and I did it. So I have this one and this. I'm not really into tattoos, but I have to get this one. But that's what it means. Yeah. Yes. Hello. Okay.
And we're so excited to be here and ask, to hear what you have to teach us, but also to ask questions. And I hear that many of my students in 8th grade say, you know, I think we have Taíno ancestry and like we don't know anything about it. Are there like opportunities in the area in Western Massachusetts to get involved and to learn as a youth? I heard you speak a little bit about your work, and so I was just curious for the 14 or so students who are here.
Yeah, so in Iwayagua we have a local leader that's in our group, and that's what they're hoping to start more of that here. When I started coming back to this area, because we started going back to the Narragansett powwow, I hadn't been to that in years, and I started going a couple of years ago, and I fell in love with it. I've always loved the Narragansett powwow. And we realized how many of our people live in the area and the need for us to have something going on in this place. So that's what we're trying to do now, you know, yes.
Yeah, if you want information, you know, you certainly can get in touch with us if the kids want to know, because we have quite a few people in the Mass area. We have some people in Newton, Boston, and in that whole area. So yeah.
And I'm retired now, so you guys could always Zoom with me if you want to Zoom.
Oh yeah, we
and
could
do
do
something.
Zoom. You could always, you know, ask for a Zoom lesson. We
Can
would
can
love
the
to do
kids
that.
go up later and see?
Yeah,
Absolutely. That's what it's for. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
They have questions for I think they're shy.
Oh, come on.
Don't be shy.
Come on. Who thinks they have Taíno ancestry and hasn't really, question.
You know the seashell that you blew?
Yes.
Could you do that again?
Oh, okay. I have a little one. This is my, here, you blow this one. I'll blow my little one.
Every time I have to like cold blow with her, I always fail. So I feel the pressure. Yes. What was the other question?
Well, that's not a question.
No? Too shy?
How about you, young man?
You.
Well, I was it's interesting because I'm Puerto Rican, and this is the first time I ever caught up understanding of the Taíno Indians. So it was interesting to listen to you guys.
Mhm.
Thank you.
you.
Yes.
That's my dad.
Yeah, all right.
And I just really want to express a lot of gratitude towards you both for taking up your ancestry and remembering your roots and opening your voice and spreading awareness and knowledge that, you know, you guys aren't extinct, we aren't extinct.
Mhm.
And I resonate so much with what you're saying about giving culture to the youth. And I know I've experienced feeling like floating out in space because like what am I connected to,
Mhm.
right? And being in America, it is mixed. And then also part of the culture here is erasure and assimilation.
Mhm.
And I just think, yeah, it's important for us to know where we come from. And so I really thank you both for teaching us and feeding us your wisdom and your history.
Thank you. Very como.
Thank you. Okay, guys, over here, my 8th graders. How many of you believe you have Taíno heritage but don't know a lot about it?
Just raise your hand.
Come on, you can raise your hand. Fine. 2 of you, okay. Come and see me. I'm going to give you my my email address so that I know I don't lose you and because I really want you to know about this. I want you to connect. We've got a bunch of teens and young adults in our group as well that are willing to help out. And, you know, and I also have those women's groups, we have the women get together, we talk about our issues, whether it's child rearing, living in two worlds, because that's what we do. We live in two worlds. I have my Taíno world, and I have my American world. So I have to dress in a certain way, I have to speak in a certain way, I have to do certain things when I'm here in the United States versus what I am culturally, spiritually. So it's always walking this fine line. So it's a way of trying to get the youth to understand that line and how important it is to continue their culture in spite of living somewhere where it isn't always appreciated.
You know, a little while ago, I mentioned that my mother just turned 100 years old, right? I remember when I was younger, I used to look at my mom, and I used to think, like, cause I would get into these arguments with my friends, like, I would go like, especially like my Puerto Rican friends, like, my mom makes the best beans. I'm like, no. My mother makes the best beans. We're Dominican, we make the best beans. You know, and, but one day I got to thinking, I said, you know, every time I think about my mom or like when I lived at home, I remember how those wonderful smells, you know, of running up the stairs, because I can smell my mother's arroz con gandules, or all that food, that what makes us who we are, you know. And then I think when she crosses over, all of that is gone, you know. And then if I don't write it down, if I don't record it, if I don't try to pass it on, it's gone forever. And that's exactly how I feel about culture. You know, if we don't preserve it, it's gone. The reason why they were able to erase us is because at a certain point, people gave up and just said, you know what, this isn't worth it. You know, what is worth about being Indian? It's like nobody's going to give you points for it. They look down on us. On the social rung ladder, we were under everybody else. You know, the Spanish in the Caribbean, they would say that one Negro could do the job of 4 Redskins. You know, that was like what they used to say, you know. Never mind that we were dying from diseases at the time, you know. So they always looked at Indians as less than everything else. So who wants to be an Indian, you know? But now we know that that's all somebody else's narrative. And if you really value your roots, you know. Now, Taíno is not about denying everything else that's inside you. That's not what it's about. When I say Taíno, it encompasses everything that's in me, my whole history. Except that my history is not 527 years old. It's 6,000 years old. Since the Spanish got to that place, my people were already there. So I consider myself Taíno with other ancestries, not other ancestries with a little bit of Taíno. Because I come from here, you know. So
I call it Taíno with enhancements.
I also just want to say, a few of our students are like very recently from Puerto Rico, and so if you were willing to say anything in Spanish to some of what you've said would be more accessible also if it was in Spanish. I had a request actually.
Oh, okay, muy bien. Mucho gusto. ¿Hablas?
Bueno, sí, quizá no lo pueden creer, pero mi español es malísimo. Discúlpenme. No, pero lo que estaba diciendo es que es importante conocer sus raíces, ¿sabes? Porque a nosotros lo que nos enseñan es una versión de historia que es europea. El español vino, conquistó todo y todo se le debe al español. Pero cuando uno está en el campo, cuando uno conoce lo que es el alma caribeña, siempre te lleva al taíno. Y nosotros no sabemos casi nada de eso porque lo han borrado. Nosotros lo que nosotros hacemos es buscar esas raíces, y a donde quiera que hay cosas que se puedan preservar, se preservan. Si tenemos que adaptar de otras culturas similares, se adaptan para poder entender bien los antepasados nuestros que estaban en el Caribe antes de llegar los españoles. Pero no significa que no también tenemos orgullo por lo que es africano o lo que es español. Todo eso es parte del conjunto de lo que es del Caribe. So, yeah.
¿Ustedes tienen preguntas? En español lo pueden decir.
Sí, habla.
Háganme todas las preguntas que yo tengo todas las contestas.
Okay.
Mande.
Okay, I'm asking for Mari right here.
Oh, Mari.
And she would like to know a little bit more about how you decided, like what really motivated you to explore your culture and then teach about it? What was maybe there was a turning point, or what was your motivation?
Yeah, okay. And English is good, Mari?
No. Español.
Huh?
Doesn't matter?
It
Okay.
doesn't matter? Okay.
English.
So I knew about my native ancestors since I was about 5 years old. But when I came to the United States, I came here during a civil war that was taking place in the Dominican Republic. And I came to live in a predominantly white neighborhood. So I was like this, I felt like a freak because everybody, I would walk into the stores and people would look at me like, and there was always questions like, where are you from? And I could hardly speak English. And they're like, oh, so you're Spanish. And it was all this thing. So in class, a lot of the times teachers would ask me, they would ask me if I was Indio, if I was Arab, if I was all this kind of stuff. And one day, one teacher in particular, and she was actually a substitute teacher, what she did was that she said to me, are you from Guatemala? Because you look like this little Mayan statue. And she had this little Mayan statue. And she said, and she asked me that question. And it was a little offensive, but I remember telling her, I said, I'm not from Guatemala, I'm from the Dominican Republic, but I am Indio. And she said, oh, wait a minute. And then she goes to the back of the room to the internet, which at that time was encyclopedias, right? And she goes to the encyclopedias and she goes to book D and she looks up Dominican Republic, and she showed me that I was wrong because in the book it said there are no Indians in the Dominican Republic. And to her maybe that was just a little statement, but it crushed me, and it really, really hurt. And but I was always very bellicose, growing up. I was always a fighter, and I just thought that she was kidding because I had to either believe her or believe my family. So I believed my family. So on one trip that we had, a school trip, I ended up going to the Museum of the American Indian. And I was so happy because I knew that I was going to start finding things there from where I came from. And sure enough, when we got there, everything, there was a big case that said Taínos, West Indies, and it was full of all these kinds of objects there. And I ran showing my friends, you see, I told you, look, Dominican Republic, what, and all this stuff. And I was like all over the place, all excited. But just as we're leaving that particular part of the museum, there was a little sign that read, by 1565, all the Indians in the Caribbean had disappeared. And I felt that, boom. And I looked at that sign and I said, one day I'm going to kick it off this wall. I remember thinking, but you know what happened to me was that when all my friends would go to church on Sundays, I would sneak on the train, because I was only about 11 or 12 years old. I would sneak on the train and go to 155th Street in Manhattan. That's where the museum was. And I would sneak there and I would sit in front of these objects for hours and hours. They had to kick me out. They actually knew me by name. They go, hey, Georgie, how you doing? And let me walk in and, George, time to go home. But I did that for a long time until I kind of I outgrew that. Somehow, and I'm not going to get into that part of the story, but I ended up working in the museum in 1994. And when we put up that exhibit that said, the Taínos are here, in my heart, I felt that I had finally kicked that little sign off that wall. Because I realized that I had come full circle, So much so that recently, my nephew, Tyler, who dances with us at powwows, he was doing a school project, and they asked him, it was on Native Americans, and they said, pick a tribe. And he goes, I want to pick the Taínos, that's what I am. And the Jesus said, go to the internet, the real internet, And he typed in Taíno, and the first picture that popped up was me. And he goes, that's my uncle, and he's the chief. And oh my God, he was so excited. And he called me, and he's like, Uncle, I want to dance. I want to do everything. And I'm like, what? The way the world switched was, there it was. Now he's proud of being Taíno, and he has something. So I felt like my life mattered in that sense, because we were able to do that. And we haven't stopped. But we're just gonna have to make sure that the next generation continues doing the same thing. But we're on good footing because a lot of young people get involved. Sometimes it's hard for them to stay focused because of tiki-takis and all that kind of stuff. But when they do, it's amazing, you know, and they ask really good questions, and it's a different world now than the one that I grew up in, for sure.
Okay, so if maybe we can let people go up.
Sure.
and-
Absolutely.
and interact a little bit.
Yeah, let's spread the love.
Unless any other questions? Oh,
Okay.
there's a question here.
Yes, sir.
Thank you so much for this. Thank you for this excellent corrective to the paper of genocide, to this mainstream narrative of extinction that so many people have reproduced. You spoke a little bit about some cultural continuities between Taíno and other indigenous groups around the region, and I noticed the meander that you described.
Right.
On the fringe. I see that appearing in Quechua symbology as well.
Absolutely.
And I wonder if you know of any other continuities between Taíno cosmology or symbols and Quechua.
Well, you know, it's interesting. I don't know how it happens, because it's hard to draw that connection between the Andes and the Amazon, especially there. But we have, for example, we call this wamo, but the actual name for it is potuto. And in the old days, it was just a long flute that we would use,
didgeridoo.
like a didgeridoo type of thing, and we call that potuto. In the Quechua, they call it potuto, you know? So there's a lot of words that are very similar, you know, and at the Museum of the American Indian, I spearheaded bringing in the Inti Raimi to the museum. I don't know if they still do it, because I left in 2019, but all my Quechua or Pichua relatives, we would talk, and then I would always find these connections, a lot of linguistic stuff. Their culture's a little different, you know, but very beautiful, yeah. They're just, you know, they wear clothes.
They're cold people.
Yes.
Yeah.
Quisiera saber si ustedes también hacen las presentaciones en Puerto Rico, porque me parece que la pregunta antes que se había hecho es una buena pregunta.
Bueno, yo sí he hecho, nosotros.
You want to explain in English and then answer in Spanish and then.
Okay, yeah. Well, the question was if we've done this in Puerto Rico. We have actually done presentations in Puerto Rico, in the Dominican Republic, and places like that.
Jamaica.
In Jamaica, but there's a lot of Taíno people there now doing the same thing, you know. In the Taíno world, it's not all love, you know. We're always competing with each other, but that's just like Caribbean 101, you know. But there's a lot of other people doing the same thing, you know. Yeah.
Una pregunta más. Just one more question. I was just wondering, some of the pictures that you have, were they all? How did you assemble some of the pictures for your slides? Because some of the pictures look like a Kuna Indians.
Oh yeah. Well, the thing is, I didn't have a picture of a karakuri on a Taíno, and she didn't have that one on her nose when I first put that slide up, because that slide is old. But that is a Kuna from Kunayala for sure. Yeah. I know. And then in one version of it, I cropped out everything else so that no one can see that she's a Kuna. But I just wanted to show that, but it didn't work because you got it. Yeah. So, no more questions?
Come on up and
Then
look.
come on up and look.